I've always wanted to be a cyborg. One of my favorite shows as a kid was The $6 Million Man, and this is a little bit closer to like the $240 Man or so. But at any rate, and I would normally feel very self-conscious and kind of geeky wearing this around, right? But like a few days ago, I saw one world-renowned statistician swallowing swords on stage here, so I figure it's okay amongst this group. But that's not what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about toys and the power that I see inherent in them. When I was a kid, I actually attended Montessori school up to 6th grade in Atlanta, Georgia. And at the time, I didn't think much about it, but then later I kind of realized that that was kind of the high point of my education. From that point on, everything else was pretty much downhill. And it wasn't until later as I started making games that I really actually think of them more as toys. People call me a game designer, but I really think of these things more as toys. But I started getting very interested in Marie Montessori and her methods and the kind of way she went about things and the way she saw it very valuable for kids to kind of discover things on their own rather than being taught these things just kind of overtly. And she would design these toys where kids, in playing with the toys, would actually come to understand these deep principles of life and nature through play. And since they discovered those things, it really stuck with them so much more. And also they would experience their own failures. There was a failure-based aspect to learning there that was very important. And so the games that I do, I think of really more as modern Montessori toys. And I really kind of want them to be presented in a way to where kids can kind of explore and discover their own principles. So a few years ago, I actually started getting very interested in the SETI program. And that's kind of the way I work, is I get interested in different kind of subjects. I dive in, I research them, and then I try to figure out how to craft a toy around that so that other people can kind of experience the same sense of discovery that I did as I was learning that subject. And it kind of led me to astrobiology, which is the study of possible life in the universe, and then Drake's equation, which is looking at the probability of life arising on planets, how long it might last, how many planets are out there, stuff like that. And I started looking at how interesting Drake's equation was because it spanned all these different subjects, physics, chemistry, sociology, economics, astronomy. And another thing that really impressed me a long time ago was Powers of 10, Charles Murray Eames' film. And I started kind of putting those two together and wondering, could I build a toy where kids would kind of trip across all these interesting principles of life, as it exists and as it might go in the future. Things where you might kind of trip across things like the Copernican principle, the Fermi paradox, the anthropic principle, the origin of life. And so I'm going to show you a toy today that I've been working on that really I think of more than anything else as kind of a philosophy toy. In playing this toy, does it bring up philosophical questions in you? This game's called Spore. I've been working on it for several years. It's getting pretty close to finish now. It occurs at all these different scales, first of all, from very, very small to very, very large. I'm just going to pop in at the start of the game. And you actually start this game kind of in a drop of water as a very, very small single-cell creature. And right off the bat, you basically just have to live, survive, reproduce. So here we are at a very kind of microscopic scale, swimming around. And I actually realized that cells don't have eyes, but it helps make it cute. The player is actually going to play through every generation of the species. And as you play the game, the creature is actually growing bit by bit. And as we start growing, the camera will actually start zooming out. And things that you see kind of in the background there will actually start slowly pulling into the foreground, showing you a little bit of what you'll be interacting with as you grow. So as we eat, the camera starts pulling out. And now we start interacting with kind of larger and larger organisms. Now, we actually play through many generations here at the cellular scale. I'm going to skip ahead here. At some point we get larger and we actually get to kind of a macroevolution scale. Now, at this point we're actually leaving the water. And one thing that's kind of important about this game is that at every level the player is kind of designing their creature. And that's kind of a fundamental aspect of this. Now, in the evolution game here, the creature scale, basically you have to eat, survive, and then reproduce. Very Darwinian. One thing we noticed with The Sims, which is the game I did earlier, is that players loved making stuff. When they were able to make stuff in the game, they had a tremendous amount of empathy and connection to it. Even if it wasn't as pretty as what other people would make, as professional artists would make for games, they really stuck with them and they really cared about what would happen to it. So at this point, we've actually left the water, and now with this little creature, we could bring up the volume a little bit. And now we might try to eat. We might sneak up on this little guy over here, maybe. Try and eat him. They'll always fight. Okay, we got him. Now we get a meal. So really, at this part of the game, what we're doing is we're running around, surviving, and also, to get to the next generation, because we're going to play through every generation of this creature, we can mate. So I'm going to just see if one of these creatures wants to mate with me. Yeah. Also, we didn't want to replay actual evolution with humans and all that because it's kind of almost more interesting to look at alternate possibilities in evolution. Evolution is usually presented as like this one path that we took through, but really it represents this huge set of possibilities. Now, once we mate, we actually click on the egg, and this is where the game starts getting interesting because one of the things we really focused on here was giving the players very high leverage tools so that for a very small amount of effort, the player could make something very cool. And it involves a lot of intelligence kind of on the tool side, but basically this is the editor where we're going to design the next generation of our creature. So it has a little spine. I can kind of move around here. I can extend. I can also inflate or deflate it with a mouse wheel. So kind of sculpt it basically like clay. We have parts here that I can kind of put on, pull off. The idea is that the player can basically design anything they can think of in this editor, and we'll basically bring it to life. So for instance, I might put some limbs on the character here. I'll inflate them kind of large. And in this case, I might decide I'm going to put, I'll put mouths on the limbs. So pretty much the player's encouraged to be very creative in the game. Here, I'll give it like one eye in the middle. We scale it up a bit, point it down. And I'll give it a few legs. So basically, in some sense, we want this to feel like kind of an amplifier for the player's imagination. So that with a very small number of clicks, a player can create something that they didn't really think was possible before. You know, this is almost like designing something like Maya that a like 8-year-old can use. But really the goal here was within about a minute, I wanted somebody to replicate what typically takes a picture artist, you know, several weeks to create. Okay, now I'll put some hands on it. Okay, so here I've basically thrown together a little creature. Let me give it a little weapon on the tail here so it can fight. Okay, so that's the complete model. Now we can actually go to the painting phase. Now at this phase, the program actually has some understanding of kind of the topology of this creature. It kind of knows where the backbone is, where the spine, the limbs are. It kind of knows how stripes should run, how it should be shaded. And so we're procedurally generating the texture map. And this is something a texture artist would take many, many days to work on. And then we can test it out once we've done that and see how it would move around. And so at this point, the computer is procedurally animating this creature. It's looking at whatever I've designed, it will actually bring it to life. And I can see how it might dance, how it might show emotions, how it might fight. So see it's attacking with its two mouths there. I can even have it pose for a photo. Snap a little photo of it. So anyway, then I bring this back into the game, it's born, and I play the next generation of my creature through evolution. Now, again, the empathy that the players have when they create the content is tremendous. Now, when players create content in this game, it's automatically sent up to a server and then redistributed to all the other players transparently. So, in fact, as I'm kind of interacting in this world with other creatures, these creatures are transparently coming from other players as they play. So the process of playing the game is the process of building up this huge database of content. And pretty much everything you're going to see in this game, there's an editor for in the game that the player can create, you know, all the way up through civilization. Here's my baby. When I eat, I'll actually start growing. This is the next generation. But I'm going to skip way ahead here. Now, normally what would happen is these creatures would kind of work their way up, eventually become intelligent. I'd start dealing with tribes, cities, and civilizations of them over time. I'm going to skip way ahead here to the space phase. Eventually, they would go out into space and start colonizing and exploring the universe. Now, really, in some sense, I want the players to be building this world in their imagination and then extracting it from them, you know, with the least amount of pain. So that's kind of what these tools are about, are how do we make the gameplay, you know, basically the player's imagination amplifier. And how do we make these tools, these editors, something that, in fact, are actually just as fun as the game itself. So this is the planet that we've been playing on up to this point in the game. So far, the entire game has been played on the surface of this little world here. Now, at this point, we're actually dealing with a very little toy planet. Almost, again, like the Montessori toy idea. You know, what happens if you give somebody a toy planet, you know, and let them play with a lot of dynamics on it? You know, what could they discover? What might they learn on this? This world was actually extracted from the player's imagination, so this is the planet that the player evolved on. So things like the buildings and the vehicles, the architecture, civilizations were all designed by the player up to this point. So here's a little city with some of our guys kind of walking around in it. Well, most games kind of put the player in the role of Luke Skywalker, and you know, this protagonist playing through the story. Really, this is more about putting the player in the role of George Lucas. You know, I want them, after they played this game, to have extracted an entire world that they're now interacting with.